Welcome to Lizzie's Bedtime Stories Halloween Special. My fourth storyteller is a returning guest, Erzabet Bishop, and she's promised me two quite sultry, saucy tales.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Well, you're awesome, and I love the way you spin a tale, and I also I like me some witches.
Well, that's good because I have some in store for you.
Yay! Read me a witchy story.
All right. This little story is called Samhain Shadows, and the star of our little show is Jasmine. And let's get going. All right. Are you ready for tonight? Jasmine tucked an errant raven curl around her ear and tidied the shelf next to the register. It was full of seasonal frivolity, pumpkin candles and stuffed witches wrapping on broomsticks. Nodding absently, Brigit laid out the dried oregano from the garden. Are you going to be here for the cooking class next Wednesday? She minced it into small pieces and scooped them into a large glass jar, sealing the lid with a twist. She moved on to the rosemary. One of the things the shop was best known for was the homegrown herbs. Yes, have you decided what we'll be making? Jasmine restocked the bags and watched as one of the regulars, Miss Busby, fussed around the Halloween display and selected a bag of gummy bats. From my granddaughter, Elise. She laid the candy on the counter and smiled at Brigit. You look so very like your mother. I'm sorry she won't be with us this year. I remember how much she loved Halloween. Brigit looked up from her herbal preparations and fought not to give in to the melancholy. Coaxing her lips into what she hoped resembled a smile, she willed herself to relax. The woman really was a dear. Thanks for stopping in, Miss Busby. Give my best to your sister. She brushed her hands on the well-worn jeans and pulled down the tight-fitting purple tee with Boo written in sparkling silver letters across her chest. It was one of the last gifts her mom had given her, and it felt good to wear it. I will. Happy Halloween. The older woman smiled and gathered her purchases, her plump body moving toward the door like a small force of nature. Thanks, Miss Busby. You have a great Halloween, too, Jasmine chuckled. The woman was no more a witch than her Uncle Francis. Miss Busby waved goodbye, clutching her candy and a stuffed cat with a pointy hat. Thank you, dears. Good night. She hurried from the shop. Jasmine and Brigit smiled. Her joy in the holidays was catching. So, have you decided about whether you're staying home or not? I think so, Brigit smiled. Molly should have everything she needs for the ritual. She tightened the black lid on the jar of rosemary and placed it back on the shelf. So you aren't going? Jasmine from behind the counter and turned the close sign on the door. Everyone will wonder where you are, you know. Brigit sighed. I know. I just don't feel very celebratory. So or not. Bathsheba hasn't been doing well, and I'm waiting to hear from Dr. Oliver. But it's the new year. You need to stop being so isolated. Jasmine bit her lip and gave her a light touch on the arm. I'm worried about you, honey. I know, Brigit shrugged, tears threatening to fall. I just need a little more time to deal with her passing Jazz. Bathsheba is lonely for her, too. She's an old cat, and I'm worried. She looked at the phone and bit her lip. I wonder where that furry menace has gotten herself off to. Are you sure that's the only reason you're waiting to hear from the good doctor? Jasmine wiggled her eyebrows and grinned, trying to lighten up the mood. Brigit felt a blush creeping up her neck. I knew it. You and that gorgeous vet were throwing enough sparks to light a balefire burning. Jasmine's smile curved upward in approval. She's probably seen someone. Brigit moved back to neaten up the herb table. Did you at least have your poppet? Jasmine picked up her sweater and purse and walked toward the door. Yes, small white lie. It was still on her work table in the back of the shop, half made. The poppet was to represent all the negative habits in her life that she wanted to burn away in the Samhain balefire. She had made one every year since she had been a girl. It was something she and her mother usually took great pains to work on together. This year she had cut out the dolly, and as soon as she began to stuff it with intentions, the void of her mother's passing became too great. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. You really are such a liar. Well, we'll miss you tonight. If you change your mind, I'll save you a place. When Brigit shook her head, she nodded. Okay. If you need me, call. Blessed Samhain, Brigit. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Taking her leave, Jasmine left, shaking her head and shutting the door behind her. Face flaming, Brigit murmured her thanks, not trusting herself to speak much more than that. She pulled the shade down and locked the door, finally alone. Her shop, Morgan's promise, had been her mother's. She lived in the small apartment upstairs, having moved there last year when her mother first started to show signs of becoming ill. Now it was hers. She looked around the tidy space filled with rows of herbs and spell workings inside. She would never be the witch her mother was. In her heart, she knew isolating herself was a bad idea, especially at Samhain. The end of the old year and the start of the new. It was time for letting go of the past, placing negativity aside and moving forward. It was also about honoring the dead, both of which Brigit planned to do on her own terms this year. Her long brown tresses had come out of the headband she had crocheted specially for this day. It was purple. Her mother had loved that color. Taking hook to yarn for a few minutes before the shop opened, she had felt her mother's presence as she fashioned the lattice pattern and tied it over her massive curls to tame them into submission. With every loop of yarn, she wove a spell, sending out her best intentions. She wanted her mother's spirit to be at peace, but to visit her one last time as the veil between the worlds grew thin for Samhain. Lord and Lady, bless my intent, fibers wound in love well spent. With these threads around my head, bring me sight among the dead. Mother, walk with me this night, weave these threads and bind them tight. The ache of losing her mother to a heart attack was still so fresh. It seemed like a nightmare she couldn't wake from, and it had only been 2 months. Blinking back tears, Brigit made her way to the rear of the shop. Work tables lined the back area, perfect for what she had in mind. She would finish her poppet, and then she would see where that led her. Brigit closed her eyes. The poppet was a manifestation of all that was negative in her life that needed to be banished. Looking around, she gathered her herbs, comfrey, pansy, rosemary, a piece of paper to write down the things she wanted banished. What would she write? Grief? No, she wanted to feel it, but at times it seemed to consume her. She stared at the paper and started to write, but each time she tried, she froze. The only word on her tongue that lingered was the loneliness. She longed to have someone special in her life. Unbidden, the image of the lovely Dr. Oliver flashed through her mind, and a warm rush of desire pooled in her belly. Frustrated, Brigit set down the paper and rooted around for some herbs to make the ointment her mother made every year. If she worked on autopilot, maybe it would come to her. She needed to work through this before she could even think about having a love life. In the kitchen, she found her mother's stash of shortening. Measuring out the required amount, she microwaved it until it was sufficiently liquefied. Adding carnation petals, vervain, sandalwood, and cinnamon, she stirred it until it was well distributed. Draining the mixture through a screen of cheesecloth, Brigit poured it into a jar and added a portion of benzoin tincture to prevent it from spoiling. She set it in the fridge to harden and went back to the owner's task of writing down what negative aspects of her life she wanted gone. Isolation? Yes. Craptastic witchery? Oh, yeah. Making the ointment just then had felt good. It was her mother's recipe, so she knew it would work, bringing her closer to the goddess when the time came. It was all the other things she lacked. Instinct, knowledge, spellcasting. In the end, all her mother had to do was think about something, and there was magic afoot. Why couldn't she have inherited that along with her massive brown hair? It would have made things so much simpler. Rifling through the bookshelf, Brigit looked for her mother's Book of Shadows. She traced her fingers along the titles. A Witch Alone, Drawing Down the Moon, Seasons of the Witch, Mrs. B's Guide to Household Witchery, among others. There, she plucked the leather-bound tome from its resting place and plunked it down on the work table. Brigit hadn't been able to look at the book until now. It simply hurt too much. Closing her eyes, she opened it, sending a benediction to the goddess that whatever page she landed on was the one she was supposed to see. As her hazel eyes opened, the first thing she noticed was a black feather wedged between the pages. The entry was marked Dreams, and it was more a drawing than a spell. Shapes of women and crows and feathers swirled into a mist. Curious. Thinking about dreams had her yawning into her hand. It was early yet. She hadn't slept well the night before, and a quick nap might be just the balm for her spirit. Brigit started to walk away, but something about the feather gave her pause. She plucked it up and carried it with her as she mounted the stairs to the small apartment. Maybe it would give her some pleasant dreams. It was the call of the crow that awakened Brigit from a dreamless sleep. Loud and braying, it sounded like it was inside the room with her. Pushing up from the bed, she blinked and looked around the darkening bedroom. Drapes fluttered in the breeze. Did she leave it open before she fell asleep? She couldn't remember. Brigit made her way across the room on shaking legs and peered out. Crows lined the streets outside of the house, their eyes watching her every move. Startled, she stepped back, but not before noticing the woman that stood beneath the tree, immersed in shadow. Vibrations of something beyond the veil caused her stomach to flutter. What was happening? Brigit snapped the window shut and turned to collect her mother's feather. It was gone. Panic welled in her chest. Had she summoned something unknowingly? Oh, goddess, why couldn't she be half the witch her mother had been? Heart racing, she made her way down the stairs and crept to the front door. The woman had moved. She had been across the street, but now appeared at the foot of the steps leading to the porch. The crows brayed and cawed in the trees. The woman wore a cloak that covered her from head to foot. By the goddess, what magic was this? Swallowing her fear, Brigit opened the door and stepped outside. Greetings, stranger, blessed be. The woman drew back her hood and stepped onto the front step. The crone walked softly, but with purpose. Her gait was slow, but as she stopped a few feet away from Brigit, a curious smile crept over her features. White hair cascaded down a face more ageless than time. Brigit met her eyes, and she felt the world shift on its axis. Something inside of her shook free of its bindings, and from the soles of her feet to the tips of her hair, she felt the breath of the goddess and the power of the earth rippling through her. Daughter, my beloved Brigit. She held out her hand, and without another word, dissolved into a murder of crows. Brigit blinked at the multitude of squawking birds and realizations on the Morgan. But what would she be doing here? The feather she had taken from her mother's book of shadows? Her body buzzed from the power flooding her body, and the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding burst out of her in a gasp. So lost was she in her thoughts that she didn't hear her name being called. Brigit, are you all right? Dr. Oliver stood on her porch, holding a cat carrier and frowning. Oh, hi. Brigit gave a nervous laugh and struggled to get her breathing back under control. Bathsheba, you brought her back. Dr. Oliver was decked out in a sexy fairy outfit, complete with a sheer black stockings, a short black skirt, gossamer wings of purple and black, and a clingy top that barely hid her assets at all. Her long black hair was hanging loose, rather than her customary updo, and hung in tantalizing ringlets. Brigit felt her body tighten, the lust so staggering it made her gasp all over again. Dr. Oliver chuckled. Yes, I was invited to a Halloween party. Bathsheba was ready to go home, and I suddenly had this urge to stop by. Oh, that's great, thanks. You didn't have to go out of your way or anything. Brigit swallowed nervously, looking at her hands. God, is she compelled, Dr. Oliver? Oh, no, I actually wanted to ask you if you wanted to have a cup of coffee or something. Maybe come by with me to the party if you aren't busy? Brigit stared at her. Dr. Oliver, do you think maybe you could start calling me Julia? Warmth spread through Brigit's face. I'd love to. Call you by your name, that is. Oh, so you're averse to coffee, is that it? Julia walked up the stairs and set the carrier on the porch. Bathsheba is doing much better. She just needs some vitamins. Good as new. Brigit grinned. No, I love coffee. She shook her head. Thanks for bringing her back. I was just about to go back inside and finish my Samhain preparations. Julia cocked her head. Is that like Halloween? A little. Do you want to come in? Brigit held open the door. Sure. Julia scooped up Bathsheba and entered the shop. Shutting the door behind her, Brigit watched Julia's reaction. Not everyone appreciated her being a witch. Julia sat the carrier down and unlatched it, releasing Bathsheba. The old gray cat emerged slowly. as if she had never left, hopped onto the window ledge and stared out into the night, completely ignoring the two women in the room. Well, that's that, Brigit smiled. Would you like some tea? Sure. Julia wandered around the shop, openly curious. I've always meant to come visit the shop. My mother used to come here when I was younger. Really? Brigit poured hot water from the water tank into the teapot. The witch's brew tea from her mother's old recipe was a blend of citrus, berries, and spice. It never failed to bring her comfort, and right now she needed it. The aroma wafted through the air, and she immediately felt better. My mom ran the shop for many years. I took it over with her passing. Yeah, I was sorry to hear about that. Julia picked up a wooden wand wrapped with charms and wires and held it up to the light. It's lovely. Thank you. It's one of mine. Brigit felt herself blush as she poured out the tea and laid the saucers on a tray with some lemon and sugar. You're an artist, Julia smiled. That's wonderful. Do you take milk with your tea? Brigit held up a small pitcher and questioned. Oh, goodness, no, Julia shuddered. Chuckling, Brigit brought the tray back to the work tables in the back of the shop. I figured we could sit while I finished my poppet. Julia wandered back to the tables. I really like your shop, Brigit. It feels like home. She smiled and met Brigit's eyes warmly. Thank you. She set a cup of tea on the table, and Julia sat. She reached for the sugar and a spoon and began to doctor the tea to her liking. What's a poppet? Brigit took a sip of tea and picked up the half-made doll. See how it represents a person? It's a representation of all the things in my life I want to change for the new year. Well, what kind of things? Brigit fidgeted. Do you really want to know? Julia took another sip of tea and frowned. Well, yes, I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. Isolation, grief, those are a couple. So is becoming a more proficient witch like my mother was. Brigit wrote the 3 things on the scrap of paper and tucked it inside the doll. She paused and looked shyly at Julia. Well, love, too. Writing it down on another piece of paper before she chickened out, she slipped it into the doll without meeting Julia's gaze. Brigit picked up the needle and began to stitch up the last bit of unfinished edging to seal her intent within. Picking up a knife to sever the thread, it slipped and she slashed into her finger. Ouch! Blood welled from the wound and dripped onto the poppet and table. She watched the crimson droplets fall and felt herself grow woozy. It was just a small wound, but hot tears gathered in her eyes. Oh! The blood touched the spellbound object, sent reverberating waves of power through Brigit, and she gasped as the heat traveled over her skin, making her hot and flushed. Blood magic? Really? Dumbfounded, she looked at her finger and the oozing blood, and a distracted smile tilted up the corner of her mouth. How ironic. She had been working so hard to follow in her mother's kitchen witch footsteps. It never even occurred for her to try. A soft laugh escaped her lips, and she smiled, watching the blood drip, soaking the poppet. Julia put down her teacup with a loud clatter and rushed around to the other side of the table in a flash. Come on, it looks worse than it probably is. Brigit let Julia lead her into the kitchen. She held her finger over the sink, rinsing it under the cool water of the tap. At her touch, electric shocks flickered over her skin. Desire between eyes. She had longed to touch Julia since they had met. She was tired of being afraid of how she felt. Thanks, Brigit said shakily. I don't know what happened. The closeness of the kitchen and having Julia so close to her had her head spinning. Liquid heat bloomed through her body in a tidal wave of longing. I think you've had a big day. Maybe you should go lay down for a bit. No, Brigit shook her head. Julia was so close. Maybe if she dared. Julia smiled into her eyes and touched her lips to Brigit's. I've been wanting to do that forever, she whispered. Really? Brigit felt as if her breath was cut off, and she needed another taste of Julia. Now. Her lips met Julia's in a hungry kiss that pulled a moan from deep inside of her. Blazing heat pooled in her pussy as she wanted much, much more. You don't know. You don't have to be alone. I've wanted this to happen since the moment you brought that old cat into the office. Julia breathed into Brigit's hair. Me too. She looked into Julia's eyes and touched her face with her fingertips. "You are so beautiful. So are you." Julia kissed her fully on the lips, and her tongue explored the soft recesses of her mouth. Their breasts rubbed together, nipples straining against each other in their need. Brigit kissed her back hungrily and led her back to the couch in the front sitting room. Pulling the blinds and locking the door, she sank onto the soft cushions. "Are you sure?" Julia removed her wings and began to slide the costume off, slowly revealing her lithe form. Her long, dark hair swayed over her pert breasts, leaving her clad in only a pastel pink thong. "What do you think? I waited a long time to get you alone." "Oh." Brigit smiled a lopsided smile and pulled her top over her head in fluid motion. Unbuttoning her jeans, she slid them over her backside and down her legs. She unclasped her bra and let it drop down her arms and onto the floor. And she hurriedly kicked off her panties. "I suppose he should go too." Julia ran down her slim hips, accentuating the shadow of her mound barely visible behind the delicate pink fabric. "Here, let me." Brigit crawled naked and knelt in front of Julia. Taking the thong in her teeth, she tugged at them, slowly pulling them down Julia's legs. Julia moaned, as Brigit ran her hands along the lines of her body. She eased Julia onto the couch and moved between her legs. "I love your breasts." Brigit pressed against her and let her lips follow her wandering hands. Touching and caressing, she cupped the ivory globes and proceeded to lick and suck on the swollen nipples. Julia arched her back and urged Brigit closer. "You have the most beautiful pussy." Brigit, I know.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt this guy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
You're making a move here.
I just totally ruined it. Oh, I'm sorry, people.
It's funny though. Okay.
Breathe. In the meantime, since we're having a little interruption, I know you've noticed this, but there's a lot of wind buffeting the room that I'm in currently. I live in the Barrier Islands in the Jersey Shore, and there is a very windy action storm going on outside, and so that's what you've been hearing in the background as well. And I'm very sorry for having a little chuckle at the expense of the dialogue of one of your characters, but you know, I'll let you pull it back in, and I'll hold my tongue.
"You have the most beautiful pussy," Brigit breathed as she tugged Julia to the edge of the couch. "Thanks," Julia gasped as Brigit's lips met her skin. "Open for me." Brigit kissed along the inside of her thighs and stroked the outside of her folds delicately with her fingers. The warm ocean smell of Julia's desire quickened Brigit's pulse. Moisture dribbled out of her cunt, and Brigit smiled. She moved in closer and gave an ice cream lick from Julia's clit to her pussy and plunged her tongue deep inside. "Oh," Julia shrieked and threaded her fingers into Brigit's hair. "Harder." Brigit lapped and sucked on her moist folds, leaving Julia wreathing beneath her. Flicking her tongue across her clit, she sent Julia's hips into a bucking frenzy. She slid 2 fingers inside of her pussy, bucking her hard and flicking her clit with her thumb. "Oh my God," Julia growled and bit one of the couch pillows as she cried out her release. Wiping her face on the discarded shirt, Brigit rested her arms on Julia's thighs, her eyes sparkling with delight. "You, oh wow." Julia panted and pulled herself upright on the couch. "That was incredible," Brigit admitted. "I can't even begin to tell you how many Julia raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Brigit nodded. "Really?" "Well, I have a confession to make too." Julia pushed Brigit back onto the couch and crawled on top of her. "Okay." Brigit chuckled and let herself be pushed onto the cushions. "I'm going to tie you up and give you a spanking for making me wait so long. I think I might have burned up 3 vibrators already." Brigit's eyes got round as Julia rubbed against her mouth, teasing her. Yes, be speechless. I like that. Now stand up, my naughty little witch. You have a spanking coming, and I know just what to use to hold your hands together." Julia reached into Brigit's hair, unsewing the purple crocheted headband. "This ought to do nicely." Julia climbed off Brigit, giving her breast a pinch, and helped her to her feet. Taking her hand, she led her back to the workroom table. Using the headband, she tied Brigit's hands to one of the chair backs. "This should hold you for now," she said, sauntering into the kitchen. Brigit stood naked in her workroom, looking down at the headband she had just made this morning and grinned. "Here we go." Julia sauntered back in, with a spatula in hand. Brigit gulped, feeling a sheen of perspiration begin to form on her body. She felt a pool of desire low in her belly and moved sharply down between her legs, causing her to gasp. What are you going to do with that?" She stared at the spatula and blushed. I'm not sure yet. Let's see. If you're nice, I may share it with you." Julia ran the edge of the spatula's handle over the smooth, round flesh of Brigit's ass and brought it down hard. "Ouch!" Brigit yelped, trying to pull her hands from the chair. "That hurt." Julia laughed. "Well, now that's pleasure and pain served together, don't you think?" Brigit flushed, unsure of how to answer. She felt the telltale signs of arousal as moisture began to slick her pussy lips. She was trying to think of the proper response when Julia popped her with the flat end of the spatula on the other side of her backside. "Ow!" She wiggled her ass and tried to move out of Julia's line of fire. Instead, she became trapped between her and the chair. Now that wasn't nice. Julia reached around and pinched one of Brigit's nipples, causing even more fluid to pool between her thighs. "Bend over and brace your hands on the chair. I think you need a little sweetening up." "Yes, ma'am," Brigit breathed, incredibly turned on despite never having done bondage before in her life. "Widen your thighs and arch your back." Julia moved behind her, and Brigit felt the tip of something being inserted into the opening of her very wet slit. What the hell was she using? Oh, goddess, it was the spatula handle. Open. Julia breathed against her ear and slid the round plastic handle in deeper, stroking Brigit's clit as she worked it in a little at a time. With one hand, Julia fondled one of Brigit's firm round breasts as she manipulated the cock-like instrument in and out of her pussy. Pressed tight against her, she felt like she was actually being fucked by a living, breathing person, and it set sparks shooting off behind her eyes. Julia's thrust became quicker, and the makeshift dildo was hotter than anything she'd ever had inside her before, including her own fingers. "Come for me, baby," Julia urged, and a gentle massage of her erect clit sent her falling off the precipice into submission and completion. Pleasure rolled through her body, rocking her to the core. A sob escaped her lips as one last wave of sensation ricocheted through her ravaged senses and sent her slumping against the chair, replete. Julia slowly withdrew the spatula handle and wiped off Brigit's juices before setting it on the table. She yanked the headband bindings from Brigit's hands and eased her into the chair. "Are you all right?" Julia tipped Brigit's face up to hers. Brigit smiled into her eyes and took Julia's hand in hers. "Yes, I think I am." She pulled Julia toward her, and their lips met. The sweet passion of the kiss saying everything words could not. The door to the front of the shop opened in a clatter, and Jasmine ran inside. "Oh, dang it, I knew I left it in there." She snatched up her bag and caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Her gaze fixed on Julia and Brigit, and she let out a whistle. "Well, so that's why you two didn't want to go to the festival tonight." Brigit and Julia, startled by the intrusion, broke apart, completely exposed. They looked at the spatula on the table and grinned. You could say that," Brigit laughed and scooped up the spatula, wielding at her lover. Julia ran and threw a dish towel from the kitchen at Brigit and used another one to cover her own nudity. "You two," Jasmine rolled her eyes and shook her head. "It's about time." Julia gave Brigit a lopsided smile. "It really is." As she turned away, Brigit noticed a mark on her shoulder that she hadn't noticed before. "You have a tattoo. Let me see." "Oh, sure. It's a crow. Got it years ago. Why?" Brigit closed her eyes and picked up the crochet headband that had worked as a binding agent in more than one way. Her mother had guided her to find the one person she could share her life with. Tears pricked behind her eyes, and she gave Julia a bright smile. "Come on, Julia. I want you to meet the rest of the coven. I'm done being isolated." "I'd love to." Julia radiated the warmth of a smile that was intimate as a kiss. "Well, girls, if you're going to go, can you please put on some clothes? You're seriously going to freak out the neighbors if you try to go sky-clad." "Just saying." Jasmine smirked and slung her bag over her shoulder. She tapped her foot and made an exaggerated gesture in thumping her watch. Come on, the bonfire's about to start. Bridget gathered their clothes and they raced into the kitchen. Moments later, they were dressed and ready to head out the door. Bridget tucked her hair under her headband and sent a prayer to the goddess in thanks. Oh, wait, my poppet. She ran back to the work table and snatched it up, ready at last to send her givings into the New Year was upon her, and it was full of abilities. Come on, slowpoke. Chorus of voices made Bridget smile, and she hurried out the door and down the steps. She followed her best friend and lover into the Samhain Shadows and felt the pulse of life and love surround her. Blessed be. The end.
Oh, goosebumps.
Yay.
Oh, my Lord. First of all, sorry for laughing during your sex scene.
That's okay.
Second of all, in addition to the buffeting winds against the second floor apartment, there's occasional sound irregularities, but I decided to go with it. I mean, there's, for those who are listening, there's some things here and there that got I wouldn't say garbled, but I'm just, acknowledging its existence. It's not enough to re-record, but there's one good solution to this problem if you've missed anything, is that you just might have to pick up the story.
Absolutely.
Where can they find this story?
Oh my goodness, it is all over the place. We at Naughty Night's website, Amazon, and Smashwords, and allromance.com.
Okay, and so if they're doing a search, what would they pop in there?
They could put in Erzabet Bishop,
okay,
or they could put in Samhain Shadows.
Samhain Shadows. That was hot and sweet and wonderful. How do you do it, Erzabet?
It's so much fun.
It was so heartwarming and smutty at the same time. Oh my God.
Thank you. I just finished writing the third book in the series and just turned it into the publisher. And I'm waiting to hear back. So we'll see. It's a holiday. Yuletide Temptation is the title. So
we'll see how the Halloween special on Lizzie's Bedtime Stories goes, because if I get enough of a positive feedback on it, I may do a holiday edition in a few months.
All right.
So you have a second story for us, and it is already in an anthology. What anthology is it in?
This is in the When the Clock Strikes 13 anthology by Yolda. It's coming out, I believe, on October 18th. So we're very excited about that. My story is about a woman who goes to a Comic-Con party, Halloween party, and there is a robbery in progress. She doesn't know. And a hunky, really awesome werewolf comes in to save her.
Woo!
And she is awesome. So it's awesome. I had a lot of fun with this story. It was
read me some damsel who did not know she was distressed until Hottie McHottie Pants came over to help.
Oh, yes. All right. This story is called Wolf Moon. Okay. Lindsay Portis groaned inwardly as she surveyed the expo hall full of masked Avengers, geeked out teens, and Cape Crusaders. Crap. Why had she let Jenna talk her into coming? Jenna had been babbling about some band that Lindsay just had to hear, but God, why pick this place to hear them? Lindsay loved a good Halloween party more than anything, but not one that was a mob scene being held at the convention center, especially since it seemed like it was the Combination Monster comic event. There were kids running everywhere, but what stunned her were the adults. Dressed to the extreme in spandex and leotards, it was obvious some of them were not even remotely functioning in the world of reality, like that guy. Ugh, she shook her head at a man in a really ugly Wookiee costume and smiled to herself as a gaggle of kids, all outfitted in the same lit-up t-shirt, streaked past. Halloween party meets the Geek Squad. Oh, Jenna was going to pay for this one. The ratio of costume characters to young adults in geekwear actually surprised her. She had expected all of the attendees to be decked out in Superman capes and Wonder Woman bustiers. Instead, it was about a 50-50 mix. The Halloween decorations made her smile, too. Coffins and animatronic zombies twitched and moaned in the graveyard setup, and a badly made-up Dracula tried to bite some of the young women as they walked by. Classic Halloween and monster-themed tunes were being piped in through speakers overhead, and Lindsay found herself humming Mom Ash as she walked along. She had a date with a smut novel and a fresh box of chocolates, but Jenna's pleading had convinced her that coming to this party would be more fun. "Come on, Linz, you might meet someone, you never know." Lindsay humphed and kept walking. Most of the women she knew were straight, and she wasn't one to arrange a date online. You just never knew for sure who you're talking to. Add that to her crazy schedule as a retail bookstore manager, and the usual date nights and get-togethers were out. She worked a lot of nights. But Jenna had begged so nicely that Lindsay had finagled her schedule to help her friend. Jenna was fearless in every other aspect of her life. She was just totally afraid to go alone to large group gatherings, like parties and conventions. Last year, Jenna dragged her to a cat convention, and Lindsay had gone home with enough cat toys and kitty litter to last 3 years. God only knew what she was going to bring home from this one. As she made her way past a booth for a comic book store called Lookapalooza, Lindsay sighed and shook her head. Kids were swarming all over the booths buying comic books, lightsabers, and posters. Lindsay supposed she shouldn't judge them, given their own penchant for smut novels, but still, some things were an affront to nature. Like kids not even old enough to shave, clutching $100 bills, while she totally had barely enough change in her purse to afford a couple of tacos at Taco Banana later. It was also annoying that she had to pay for parking and then have to pay to get in. This is so coming out of Jenna's high when I catch up to her. This was a venti salted caramel mocha with cream cheese pumpkin muffin kind of pain in the ass day, and she was so going to need the chocolate coffee bliss by the time she got out of there. Looking around for any sign of her soon-to-be dead friend, Lindsay shrieked in outrage as 2 guys in stretch pants plowed into her, sending her reeling headfirst into a large theme-oriented display of plants and tombstones. Slamming her shin against the surprisingly hard plastic, Lindsay yowled as her face met with a large ficus. "Ow! He's got a gun!" one of the teens shouted as he ran, cape fluttering behind him. Lindsay gaped after him, flailing against a particularly persistent plant that whipped into her face. A gun? Holy shit, no way. It had to be a reenactment. They couldn't have a bunch of Cape Crusaders without a bad guy. It was all fun and games, after all. Lindsay was sure that they did stuff like that all the time, these kinds of things. After scraping herself out of the moss and foliage, Lindsay found herself in the middle of another stampede as 3 teens came running in her direction, screaming about the crazy guy with a gun. She had just enough time to jump back into the plants so she didn't get trampled a second time as they raced for the exit. Yeah, right. If anybody does have a gun, they better keep it away from me, because right now, I can happily grab it and use it on those damn kids, like everybody down in their role-playing. She disengaged herself from the fully leafed ficus, smoothed down her t-shirt, and brushed off her shorts. Advancing into the expo hall, she heard more screams. A spike of anger stabbed through her. Of course there were going to be guns. It was a superhero costume event and a Halloween party. Guns and swords and lightsabers were strapped on half the costume population in there. She rolled her eyes and stalked down the carpeted walkway toward the main hall. Love Potion number 9 began to play, and Lindsay hummed along, trying to squelch her irritation. After all, it was a party. She should at least try to have some fun. The burst of yelling and noise off in the distance to her left sounded just a little too real. Lindsay bit her lip and growled as she scanned the crowd. Being a manager at a bookstore, she had her share of weirdos and countless incidents, including robberies over the years. She could pretty much tell when something was wrong, and her radar was pinging. If Jenna was in there, Lindsay had to find out what the hell was going on. After this, they were so having a discussion about meeting at Starbucks the next time. Lindsay had enough drama at the bookstore. Days off should be quiet, with coffee, smut books, and chocolate, and in that order, too. She moved to a secluded corner, whipped out her phone, and sent Jenna a text. All units, shots fired in Expo Building, side 1A. I repeat, shots fired, Expo Building, side 1A. Subject not visible, shots fired. Sniper, stand down. Stand down. SWAT's notified. Taggert, report. Taggert's inside clenched when the call came in. A gunman was active and roaming the Comic Art Con Halloween extravaganza. It was believed that one person had been shot already. Great. Taggert strapped on her vest and made sure her gun was locked and loaded. She was the one they sent in when the snipers couldn't get a beat on the suspect. Like now. It was her turn. Taggert on site, going in, she replied into the police radio. She crept closer to one of the service doors at the side of the hall where the gunman was last reported. The hallway was dimly lit and led straight into the main ballroom of the conference hall. She could see booths lit up in the center and pulled up the map the sergeant had given her. The event had 150 booths, a movie exhibit, and a stage where a band was scheduled to play later in the afternoon. She looked at her watch and grimaced. 2 hours until the band was to perform, and the place was already crawling with people, most of them in costume. She needed to secure the subject with as little collateral damage as possible. Taggert moved quietly, trying to blend in with the crowd until she found what she was looking for. The screaming was hard to miss. In the corner next to the stage, near the entrance to the small on-site bank, the perp was holding a small crowd of convention-goers. Taggert saw that a small, youthful male with an air of authority was presiding over the hostages. Restless energy rolled off the gunman as he paced back and forth like a caged animal. The closely cropped dark hair was neatly trimmed, the skin pulled taut over the ridge of high cheekbones. His shoulders were broad, and his form muscular. Jaw clenched, he had a stubborn, arrogant look about him. His posture was aggressive as he held the gun on the group. On the floor, all of you, now! You! He aimed the weapon at a teenage boy in a vampire costume. Get that bank manager over here and tell him to bring the money. His gun waved wildly toward the man behind the counter in the bank and gestured him to come out, but the man wasn't moving. One of the girls near the counter collapsed in tears. A security officer stepped forward. His voice was so soft, Taggert couldn't hear what he said. The guard gesticulated with his hands, trying to get the gunman to stand down. The boom of gunfire echoed in the cavernous space. Falling to the floor, the security officer screamed as blood spread across the pant leg of his khaki uniform. I told you to get down, people. Now do it. The next asshole who doesn't listen to me is dead. Do you understand? More screams erupted in the hall as a random shot echoed through the space. A man beside the sobbing girl grabbed her arm and dragged her back into the anonymity of the crowd. Look around, people. Do you see the black duffel bag next to that bank counter? The gunman gestured toward the bank. Several people turned their heads to look. Good, you are paying attention. His features twisted into a smirk, his eyes cold and flat. If the bank manager doesn't give me what I want, you're all going to find out what's in that bag. His dark rolling laugh set the hairs on Taggert's arms on end. Unfucking real. What was in that bag? Taggert fell back to a location where she could still see what was happening, while she considered how best to get the situation under control. As soon as she got to a safe place, she had to radio in and let the team know the latest developments. She looked over the map and moved away from the gunmen toward an area where there's supposed to be a service entrance. Crouching low and keeping an eye on the suspect, she backed into the hallway. As she did, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a second gunman appear at the entrance of the bank. Taggert watched in dismay as he reached down into the duffel bag and pulled out what appeared to be a homemade bomb. Okay, Mr. Bank Manager, the gunman cooed, lifting the bomb. If you don't want this crowd blown to kingdom come, you better get your ass back there and get that safe open, or we're going to have to get rough. When the bank manager the young man looked around among the hostages. Maybe we should make an example of this young woman here. Chiseled features morphed into a predatory smile as he moved toward one of the captives. You, the second gunman pointed at a young blonde woman with a bank badge fixed to her blouse. Get over here now. But the woman froze, her face a mask of panic. Now, bitch. She yanked her toward the bank counter. He pulled a roll of duct tape from the bag on the ground and proceeded to wrap the homemade pipe bomb to the woman's abdomen. Her cries carried across the room, and Taggert had to fight the urge to shift and take the motherfucker out right then. If she did, Graham would have her head in a bag. She'd be out of the job she loved. No, she had to bide her time. Now where are you, Mr. Manager? Are you so chicken shit that you let your employee here take the heat for you? You have 20 minutes to get the money to me, or this lovely lady is going to become a pile of blood and guts right here, along with most of the rest of you. We want the money. We'll leave you to it. Your time starts now. He pushed a button on the device, and a beeping sound filled the shocked silence. The bomb was activated. The bank manager paled and vanished into the recesses of the bank. Taggert hoped the safe didn't have a time lock. A lot of banks use those these days for just that reason. 20 minutes. Fuck. When Lindsay heard the first shot from close by, she almost wet herself. It wasn't a joke. There was a real jerk with a gun out there, and he had staked out the stage where the concert was to be held. She rounded the corner and saw the gunman freaking out. When she spotted the service entrance, she ducked through it, trying to figure out what she should do, how she could find Jenna. She looked back into the room through the small glass window, thankful she could watch while hidden from view. She nearly cheered as someone wearing a bulletproof vest approached the door. It seemed likely that it was a cop in plain clothes. Ass first, the cop backed toward the same space Lindsay was occupying. The door eased open, and Lindsay was staring right at the well-shaped, jean-clad derriere. She almost reached out to touch the vision of taut loveliness, but sighed as caution reared its head. Who knew what was on the other side of that coin? Even if this turned out to be a girl who liked the ladies, there were far more pressing considerations at the moment. Lindsay fell back onto her ass, and a burst of air whooshed out from her lips as the cold concrete floor made contact through her shorts. Still, she rather hoped the face matched the gorgeous rear view, because anything less would be a crying shame. Lindsay sighed and pursed her lips. You want to get your ass out of my face? The startled officer spun around, and in an instant, Lindsay was staring past the barrel of the gun into a pair of silver blue eyes. The officer's face narrowed. Don't move. Lindsay held out her hands and scooted away, trying not to think about the fact that the gorgeous cop probably had handcuffed her utility belt. A girl could only dream. Life had been a series of bitch slaps lately, and this was another one. It was staring at Taggert in the form of a petite little redhead in a tight white t-shirt and form-fitting shorts. Another redhead. Holy Christ, not today. The ink wasn't even dry on the divorce papers her wife had served Taggert after she had been infected with the lupine virus. For better or for worse, had decidedly gone in the latter direction, and Shelby had bailed after she had witnessed Taggert changing the first time. It didn't matter that Taggert would never hurt her. Ever. All that mattered to Shelby was being normal. Human, like everyone else. Taggert could be a lesbian and a cop, but not a monster. That was an unforgivable crime, and Shelby had never let her forget it. Now here she was eyeing this girl. No, woman. The redhead was very much a woman. Taking in the soft globes of her breast, the way the shirt was painted on her like a second skin, made Taggert want to forget the gunman, the bomb, her responsibilities, and bury her face in that chest and just stay there. The wound on her arm from the shifter attack had healed, but the moon was due to be full tonight. Her heightened senses and boiling blood were going wild. In this closed space, she could scent the girl's arousal. It reached deep inside, the need scraping her senses to the core and then filling them back in with the essence of the woman. She had the sense that this was someone who could make her life whole again. My mate. Looking at the woman at her feet made her want to do things she hadn't considered since Shelby had stopped warming her bed. God, it felt like 1,000 years ago. They had been on the outs well before the issues with Graham began, but Taggert just didn't want to believe it. When she became infected with the lupine virus, it was the last straw for Shelby. Taggert closed her eyes and gave herself a mental shake. That time was over. There was a gorgeous woman in front of her that was striking a chord deep inside of her. Shaking with her hunger, she struggled to maintain control. Down, girl. Her beast was ravenous. It scented a potential mate in the woman on the floor. Could it be? A mate? Here? Now? God! Taggert's nipples tightened. Lust clouded her vision, and she almost forgot why she was here in the first place. Damn it! She definitely did not need this distraction. She staggered to the wall and willed her traitorous body back under control. Gunman first, imaginary sex with gorgeous redheaded woman later. Move away from the entrance, Red. The young woman smirked at her and eyed her with hungry look that made Taggert's body scream in frustration. Control! Totally ignoring Taggert's instruction, the woman got up from the floor and moved toward the window. Is he still there? Stay back! Taggert holstered her gun and peered through the window to the convention hall. She pulled out her radio and tried to push the girl away from the door, further back into the hallway. Please stay back. I don't want you to get hurt. The girl crossed her arms under her breasts. Taggert here. Suspects located. The radio crackled, and she turned down the volume. Confirmed. Status. 2 gunmen, one at the concert stage, the other at the bank entrance. They're waiting for the bank manager to bring them money. What appears to be a homemade explosive device has been duct taped to the bank teller. The second suspect gave the manager 20 minutes to get the money, or he will detonate the bomb. I need SWAT and the bomb squad on site. Stat. There was a crackle in the line, and a new voice joined the conversation. Taggert, this is Sergeant Graham. Sergeant? She struggled to keep her voice even. That bastard had no right to interfere with her operation, especially given the bullshit he had pulled with her wife. He had encouraged Shelby to leave her and then made his move. Hell, he was in her bed a long time before the divorce was even final. There was a special place in hell for people like Graham. A slow, poisonous hate churned in the pit of her stomach, and she tried unsuccessfully to tamp it down. SWAT is on their way. Wait for backup. What kind of bomb? It looked to be a pipe bomb. If it blows, we're going to lose a lot of hostages along with two suspects. Roger that. Wait until the bomb squad's in position before you try to take down the perps. Anger burned into her gut. Wait? She had taken out criminals in every stage of a siege, and Graham was telling her how to run her scene? Fuck him. It was 2 kids with guns and a bomb. It was the bomb that gave her pause. Could she take out the asshole with the button before he could press it? She knew she needed the bomb squad to defuse the bomb, but maybe she could at least apprehend the gunman. Sir, with all due respect, the gunmen have already shot at least 1 person. No, you listen, detective. Stay where you are. SWAT and the bomb squad are en route, but there's an accident on the bridge. They will rendezvous with you in about 30. Stay put. Invisible, you got me? And no fucked up werewolf antics either. 30? Is he kidding? With all due respect, about 30 doesn't get them here within the gunman's deadline. I don't know if he would seriously blow himself up with the other hostages if the deadline isn't, but Taggert! Yeah, I've got you, sir. Staying put. Taggert out. Unable to contain her frustration, she threw the radio against the wall, and it clattered to the floor with a reverberating thud. The sexy cop was having a meltdown. No, sexy werewolf detective. It figured more and more wolves were being outed all the time. Next, it would be vampires. The world was getting more accepting. Why not? She had read enough shifter smut novels to give her lots of ideas about just how wild they could be in bed. Whatever was happening in the convention hall, there were some distinct undercurrents in the exchanges between the 2 police officers, but that was not her business. A bomb squad? Her pulse raced, and she moved closer to the window. How could the police possibly take 30 minutes to get there? It was insane. Hadn't the detective just said something about 20 minutes before a bomb would be detonated? Crap! Lindsay stared at the radio on the floor and gave the detective a pointed look. So, Detective Taggert, is it? You weren't going to tell me there was a second guy out there with a bomb? You heard me just now. What more do you want? I don't know. Lindsay shook her head. I can't believe they have to bring a bomb squad? What if they don't make it on time? My friend is in there somewhere. Her voice shut off as she made a move to get a clear view through the window. No! Taggert held up a hand, her steel blue eyes flashing a warning that Lindsay was determined to ignore. Or were the eyes yellow? Lindsay stared, not quite believing what she was seeing. Your eyes? She tried to mask the uneasy tone in her voice, but it quavered just the same. They just changed. It wasn't like having werewolves among them was any surprise, but this was just the first time Lindsay had ever met one. As far as she knew, anyway. This was different from seeing a story on the news or reading smoking hot sex stories about steamy shapeshifters. This was real, and the sexy shifter was only a couple feet in front of her. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, Taggert snorted, edging Lindsay away from the window and back into the recesses of the hallway. Lindsay crossed her arms over her chest and stared, her lips pressed together in anger. Are you calling me a liar? Taggert sighed. No. She turned from the window and moved toward her. Look, Red. It'll just be a half an hour before the squad will be here. Maybe less. Let's just stay calm and make the best of this, okay? You propose we do that? Whip out a deck of cards? No, she snorted. I mean, I didn't exactly plan on being stuck here with a civilian while I wait for some asshole to get his squatting gear and make arrangement for this 3-ring circus. They promoted Graham. Let him worry about the specifics. I'd rather be in the shit than organizing all the departments and getting them to try to work together without shooting each other. Oh, so now I'm in the same league as the asshole. Is that it? A deviation in your freaking master plan? Lindsay snarled. Look, my friend's in there. I can't just let her get shot or blown up by a couple of wannabe thugs. I won't. She marched toward the door, but Taggert was faster. Stop. Taggert knocked her backwards and pressed her against the concrete wall. Initially forceful, the move turned into something else as Lindsay stared into the detective's stormy blue eyes. The yellow shifted in and out, but she was prepared for it this time, and it didn't frighten her. Taggert's body pressed Lindsay to the wall, and the yellow flecks gleamed golden as the weir inched to the floor. You have the softest skin, Taggert whispered, her fingers releasing their hold on Lindsay's wrist. Sighing, Lindsay let her body relax against the wall. When Taggert's lips brushed against hers, Lindsay met her halfway. The alpha femaleness of the detective pervaded her senses. Lindsay felt the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself start to crumble. It had been so long since anyone had touched her. At all. She hadn't dated in what seemed like forever. To feel the warmth of another soft female form was like handing an eclair to a dieting woman. She wanted it, and she wanted it now. Heat pulsed between her legs, and a tear slipped out, unheeded. Oh, don't cry. I may hate that son of a bitch Graham, but he has a bomb squad unit under his command that can take care of any explosive device. The SWAT guys know their stuff too. They know the bomber's time frame, and they'll get here. We'll get you and your friend out of here safely. Taggert enveloped Lindsay in her arms. The soft curves of Taggert's breast pressed against her, and Lindsay trembled with a whirlwind of desire, such as she had never felt before. And she knew that this was a moment that could never come again. She was trapped in a secluded place with a cop that looked something out of her erotic daydreams. She lifted her eyes to meet Taggert's, and she knew she had to take a chance. She needed to feel Taggert's hands on her flesh, her fingers inside of her. Right here, right now. Lindsay wanted her with every fiber of her being. Another round of gunfire erupted in the convention hall, and Lindsay cursed the shooter. A few feet away, men with guns were holding people hostage, and given the threat of the bomb, they could all die. The danger of the situation only made Lindsay want to feel more alive. The strength and vulnerability that warred in Taggert's eyes made Lindsay's heart flutter in her chest. She believed that things happened for a reason. Sucking in her breath, she stared into the werewolf's yellow eyes and parted her lips in invitation. Taggert pressed her lips against Red's, and the arousal that had been torturing her rose up like the seething monster that it was. The sensation of Red's breast, rubbing against her own, snapped the fragile control she was holding over herself. Taggert's nipples pebbled, and liquid seeped from her aching slit. She devoured the offered lips like a starving woman. Taggert's hands fisted in the red hair, and her knee thrust between willing legs as she pressed Red flat against the wall. Kissing and licking down the side of her neck, Taggert yanked up the t-shirt and cupped the luscious breasts in her palms. Are you sure about this? She whispered in Red's ear. Taggert didn't have sex with strangers in hallways. This was not who she was. For that moment, her body was answering to a stronger force. This woman is my mate. Warmth flooded through Taggert, blood pounding incessantly through the most sensitive spots of her body. Never had she felt a connection with a woman so quickly. It staggered Taggert and humbled her at the same time. The trust in Red's eyes, even knowing what Taggert was and what could happen if the moon dictated that it was time for her to change. Would she be the monster Shelby thought she was? No, she decided. Not ever. The scent of Red's arousal pulled at her. All she knew of the moment was this woman in front of her. She was the world. Gunman be damned. Taggert needed to taste her, devour her sweetness, and keep the darkness at bay. Oh yes, I'm sure. Mischief winked in the redhead's eyes. Better hurry, though. We haven't much time. Taggert rolled her eyes. Salacious. That's what you are. She kissed the tempting mouth, exploring it with care. Red was so soft. What began as a feather touch morphed into a burning want, and Taggert had to stifle a moan. She reached between them, and with a flick of a finger, unlatched, releasing the soft mounds into her eager hands. God! Her lips grazed over the creamy flesh, and she used her teeth to tease Red's nipples into rosy peaks of desire. Oh, a moment of clarity flared through her fevered brain, and Red pulled herself away from Taggert's ministrations. Red, Taggert stared into her sapphire depths. I don't even know your name. We're working strictly on chemistry here. Lindsay, she smiled, and pressed her lips against Taggert's. Lindsay felt Taggert's tentative touch against the front of her shorts. With shaking fingers, Lindsay hastily unbuttoned them and slid them down her legs and kicked them to the side. Taggert was sexual desire personified, and Lindsay shuddered in anticipation. The cool air felt erotic against the dampness of her panties, but in seconds they had joined the shorts on the floor. She shook the bra as she yanked the shirt over her head, now completely naked and at Taggert's mercies. It felt so amazing to be touched like this, to be worshipped. Taggert was so fully clothed. Lindsay watched Taggert as she took off her bulletproof vest and her gun and laid them on the floor next to Lindsay's clothes. Lindsay's fingers skimmed Taggert's button fly as she pressed her lips against the detective's. Her tongue swirled into the cop's mouth to mate with hers. Oh my God, I need you. Lindsay ran her hands down Taggert's thighs, totally turned on that she was naked while her partner was still fully clothed. Taggert gave Lindsay a light kiss and spun her around to face the wall. Hands in front of you and spread your legs. The authority in Taggert's voice was compelling, and it made Lindsay's pussy weep with need. Lindsay positioned her hips and arched her back. Her fingers slid along the concrete wall as she braced herself. She moaned as the material of Taggert's jeans rubbed against her sensitive skin. The anticipation was killing her. Taggert was so aroused she couldn't decide what to do first. With Lindsay positioned in front of her, she let her eyes roam over the creamy, smooth skin. Taggert reached around Lindsay and caressed her breasts. Moving her hands lower, Taggert's fingers caressed a sensual path down her abdomen, mapping, exploring, only to finally delve into the delta between Lindsay's thighs. Taggert brushed the mound covered with crinkly red hair, and then slipped a finger inside of Lindsay's pussy, the silky folds slick with desire. She withdrew one finger, and Lindsay mewled in protest. Oh, Red, you're so wet. Such a naughty, naughty... Taggert, now! I can't wait any longer. I need you. Lindsay groaned and spread her legs wider, keening softly as Taggert eased two fingers inside of her and began to thrust. Taggert finger-fucked her, thumbing her clit as she stroked, and it wasn't long before the luscious redhead was shuddering in her arms. Taggert wanted more time, but gunfire echoed in the event hall, and there was no more time. Not for the redhead, and certainly not for waiting. It was time to move. Lindsay's head rested against the wall, her body still spasming in orgasm. Her muddled consciousness realized something was going on. When the shouts came, she felt Taggert pull out of her and heard her move toward the window. Lindsay, here, honey, you need to put these on. She handed Lindsay her clothes. Lindsay blinked up at her mind still muzzy. She jerked upright as the gun went off, and a flood of fear replaced the warmth that existed inside of her only moments before. Now alert, Lindsay put on her bra and yanked the t-shirt over her head, then pulled on her discarded panties and shorts. Taggert placed to her a kiss on her forehead. I need to call in. Taggert grabbed the discarded radio and flicked it on. Taggert to station. Shots fired. Civilians trapped in range. Perps are still armed. Need ETA on SWAT and bomb squad. ASAP. Report, please. She looked down at her watch. It had been 17 minutes. They had better hurry because if the bomber was serious about the 20-minute deadline, the day was about to get seriously fucked up. Detective, SWAT arriving on site. Bomb squad gearing up. Taggert going in. Please advise SWAT plainclothes officers in the hall. What are you going to do? Lindsay blinked back tears. She jerked her head toward the door as more shots were fired. She had just found the woman who made her feel all the wanton things she had ever dreamed of, and now, as selfish as it seemed, she was most afraid that Taggert could be shot or blown up. Taggert gave Lindsay a grim, just a light kiss on her lips. Don't forget, your friend's in there. And she's not the only one. Taggert's eyes caressed the satiated body. I have to go, babe. She slipped into her gun and vest and gestured for Lindsay to stay down. The hell she would. Taggert tried not to think of the luscious beauty and the amazing sex they had just shared. If she wasn't totally focused, she would get herself shot for being distracted by a curvaceous redhead with a bod. Taggert's pussy spasmed just thinking about what she wanted to do to her, even now. Lindsay, my mate. Reveling in the scent of Lindsay still on her fingers, heat flooded Taggert's body. After this was over, she was going to court her good and proper. A mate. God, it was staggering. She closed her eyes and rolled herself back to be back in the moment. Taggert rounded the corner, weapon drawn, and saw the gunman on the stage an instant before he noticed her. She assessed the situation for civilians in danger, and that gave the perp a split-second advantage. The force of the bullet rocked Taggert backwards and onto the floor. She roared. Her instinct to protect her prospective mate at all costs took over. Pain. As her body went into full change, all Taggert was aware of was the buckling sensation of her muscles rippling and altering. Her sense of smell and sight honed to a killing edge. A scream erupted from her throat as a final muscle spasm shook her body to the core, and she writhed in agony and howled in pain. Moments later, the change complete, Taggert shook off the rags that had been her clothes and stood up, towering over the humans gathered in front of the stage. Her rage was not directed toward them. No, only toward the gunman who had threatened what was hers, her mate, her human. Teeth bared, Taggert snarled as she approached the punk on the stage. The man who had shot her once already screamed as he tried to pull the trigger again as he ran blindly for the exit. This time, she was faster. She lunged toward him and batted the gun from his grip. With her claws, she held him down, daring him to move. The urge to submit to the monster within burbled in the pit of her stomach. Her senses roiled, blood and bone, and the desire to rake across the soft flesh until she uncovered the tender parts beneath. "Oh, God!" he shrieked. "No, don't fucking eat me!" The male beneath her reeked of fear, and Taggert drew her lips back in a deadly snarl. His flesh smelled so good, and she wanted to make him pay for shooting her. His scream was high and long, his eyes wide with terror. A noise from a short distance away caused Taggert to whip her head around. The other perp was emerging from the bank, duffel bag filled to bursting with cash. He had a man in a suit and a woman fitted with a bomb at gunpoint and was herding them toward the outside exit. Seeing Taggert, he shouted, "Oh shit!" Aiming his gun, he fired around in her direction but missed. The woman screamed as the gunman jabbed his gun against her back, and she dissolved into hysterical tears. The man Taggert surmised was the bank manager tried to drag the teller away, but the shooter put a bullet into the manager's leg. It was now clear to Taggert that these men wanted the money, but they didn't want to die. The one with the detonator would not explode the bomb and risk his own life. Taggert raised her paw and bashed the first gunman hard enough to knock him unconscious, and blessedly his screaming stopped. She had to reach the second perp before he shot someone else or escaped with the money. He was only a few feet away from freedom, and she had no idea where her backup was. At that moment, the SWAT team broke through one of the plate glass windows, and the man with the money was forced into action. He fired a round that hit Taggert in the thigh and shoved the blonde woman to the floor. As he scrambled toward the exit, money showered from the open bag. Taggert knew that if the gunman reached the door, he might try to blow the bomb before it could be disarmed in order to cover his escape. Howling her rage, she charged the fleeing gunman, taking him down with a single blow to the side of the head. His gun went skidding across the floor, landing at the feet of the SWAT officer. She ripped the detonator button from his trembling hand. From her vantage point above the would-be bomber, Taggert saw officers in their safety suits removing the device from the blonde, who was still crying and shrieking. Other members of the bomb squad and SWAT team were swarming through the room, evacuating the civilians. The bank manager was grasping his leg with one hand while trying to stuff the bills back into the bag with the other, but the officers on the scene stopped him so they could get photographs for evidence. Paramedics were also hovering over the injured man in order to treat his wound. SWAT teams swarmed the first suspect, who was unconscious on the floor, and secured him without further incident. Seeing that the scene was secured, Taggert returned her attention to the man at her feet and growled deep in her throat. The wound on her thigh pulsed as blood oozed down the matted fur of her leg. "Get it off me!" the second gunman screamed, his voice shrill. Warm urine stained the front of his jeans. "This thing is going to eat me and you're just going to watch? Detective Taggert, please stop now." A nearby SWAT officer was eyeing her warily. "Step away from the suspect. He is officially in custody." She snarled, unwilling to give up her prey so easily. "Stand down, Taggert." She turned her massive frame to see her sergeant shouldering his way through the crowd. The fire of bloodlust burned in her veins. It took every ounce of self-control she could muster to tamp it down and not eviscerate the bastard just for the fun of it. She knew he was fucking enjoying this. Hating the fact that Graham had seen her change, she concentrated on getting herself under control. It was so new to her. She was still getting used to this body. Taggert had a sudden moment of panic. She didn't want Lindsay to see her like this. Not after what had just happened between them in the hallway. She didn't want to ruin any chance of wooing Lindsay, her mate. As if summoned, the redhead appeared. The rage and anger flooded out of Taggert when her eyes met Lindsay's. All she wanted to do was be with her. Not even Graham, and him stabbing her in the back mattered. Taggert groaned as she felt the change begin to reverse, and she hit the floor, writhing in pain. Lindsay gasped as she watched Taggert's body struggling to put itself back to rights. Naked and cold, Taggert was shivering when her human form reappeared. It was agony watching as her sexy werewolf changed from the proud, black-haired beast that towered over the humans in the convention hall into the writhing bundle of energy on the floor. Lindsay marveled at what she was seeing, but at the same time, she was terrified. "Damn it, Taggert. I can't leave you for a single minute without you getting shot." Scowling, Lindsay glared at a cop standing nearby. "Can we get an EMT over here, please?" "Just a couple of flesh wounds." Taggert's attempt at a smile turned into a grimace as a final muscle spasm shook her body. "Look, the change has them healed almost already." "Huh." Lindsay snatched a blanket from one of the EMTs who had responded to her summons. She wrapped the blanket around Taggert's strong shoulders, her hand lingering longer than necessary. "Are you done here?" Taggert sat up and looked around. "I think so. Looks like the guys in the bomb techs have it wrapped up. Talk about the dumbest script ever. Who tried to rob a convention center anyway?" The medical teams were treating the injured hostages, while the police whisked the two gunmen out of the building, both babbling about a werewolf attacking them. It made Taggert smile. "Have you found your friend?" "Not yet. I was a little focused on making sure you hadn't gotten yourself killed." Concern nodding inside her, Lindsay watched Taggert struggle to stand. "Are you sure you can stand? You still look a little off kilter." "Yes. My head's still trying to adjust back into human mode. As a weir, I wanted to rip that guy's head off." Taggert closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Which guy?" Taggert laughed bitterly. "Well, now that you mention it, all of them, but mostly the sergeants, if you want to know the truth." "Is he the sergeant?" Lindsay tilted her head toward the man barking orders and directing activity to the left of the stage. "Yeah, that would be him." "Why do you hate him so?" Lindsay helped Taggert to get her to her feet and guided her toward the door and away from the chaos. "Bastard convinced my ex-wife that my lupine virus made her unfit to be in a relationship, and then the son of a bitch slept with her." Taggert groaned as she took a step forward. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, the bullet wounds are healing. One of the perks of the virus. You feel fast, but it kind of smarts." "Oh." Lindsay sucked in a breath as a frown settled onto her features, and it cleared. "So, wow, you're divorced then?" "You could say that." "Good." Taggert lifted an eyebrow and gave Lindsay an inscrutable look. "So, you doing anything later tonight?" Lindsay asked. "Not really. Why?" Your blanket's slipping, by the way." "Oh," Taggert laughed, wrapping it tighter around herself. "I hate that aspect of the change. That's the third pair of jeans I've destroyed in the last month." "Well, that's a pain. I can see it now. Cop arrested for indecent exposure." Lindsay grinned and reached to pull the front of the blanket closed, but not before she got a pleasing eyeful of naked detective. Do you change with the moon, or does it just happen? Both. Taggert spoke with slight bitterness. It's damned inconvenient if you want to know the truth. Well, I was kind of thinking, we never did get to finish what we started in the hallway. Lindsay waggled her eyebrows suggestively, hoping Taggert would take the hint. They pushed through the exit door and outside into the night air. Are you sure? Big hairy werewolf, girl who will use a quota of razors and hair removal equipment at least once a month, meat eater, hates the color pink. I can work with that. Well, except for one thing. Lindsay linked her arm through Taggert's as they slowly walked across the parking lot to her car. I'm just not sure this will work between us. Might be a deal breaker. Taggert stopped mid-step, her eyes wide. What? Lindsay met Taggert's eyes, her lips twitching with suppressed laughter. Pink is my favorite color. Taggert blew out a breath and rolled her eyes. Oh, I thought you were going to say you didn't date cops or something. Lindsay giggled. Yeah, right. She stopped at the car and looked back at the convention center. You know, before we leave here, I'd better give my friend Jen a call and make sure she's okay. She pulled her phone out of her purse and checked her text messages. Well, son of a bitch. Something wrong? Taggert asked. She wasn't hurt. Frankly, I'm not sure if I should be mad or insanely grateful. What? You know that friend who begged me to come here? When Taggert nodded, Lindsay said, she never even showed up. She's at home. Something about catching a lupine virus. Lindsay shook her head and grinned up at Taggert. Well, I could use some help licking my wounds. What do you say? Taggert smiled, her gaze as intimate as a kiss. I thought you'd never ask.
Yay! That was cool. And I can't remember which story it popped up in, but my absolute favorite seasonal coffee beverage is the salted caramel mocha.
Me too. Through a lot of my works.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much for coming and reading these two unique, wonderful. Wow, the fitting the sex into that little time slot was amazing.
Yes, it was tricky. Hallway bombs, you know.
The only thing I was confused about is if she's wearing a bulletproof vest, how can they feel boobies?
She took the vest off.
No, before the vest was, when the vest was on and they were kind of getting a little closer, don't be shy.
Oh, that's a really good point.
I was like, how are they? I mean, I love feeling boobies. I'm like, how are they? Well, it didn't occur to me until she was taking off her vest and her gun, and I was like, wait, how? Because that's magical.
It is magical.
See, that's the answer. So, Erzabet, thank you for coming on the Halloween special, and maybe I'll hit you up for a holiday special.
That sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much, and now you can go and have your wonderful dinner.
Absolutely.
Take care.